Imagine this. You're 38, finally pregnant with your miracle baby after years of heartbreak and miscarriages. You're clutching that precious ultrasound photo in the rain-soaked parking lot when your husband's forgotten phone buzzes. One glance at the message from his young, brilliant business partner, Victoria. Can't wait until Sarah's gone. 3 weeks just us in the mansion. Your world crumbles as you uncover a web of lies, affairs, and a calculated plan to steal your life, your home, even your child. But what if the betrayal runs deeper than an affair? What if Victoria isn't just a mistress, but a professional predator with a dark history of destroying families? In Buried Secrets, a pregnant wife's ultimate betrayal, join Sarah Morrison on a heart-pounding journey from devastated wife to fierce warrior, uncovering shocking twists, hidden conspiracies, and a fight for survival that will leave you breathless. Will Sarah expose the truth and protect her daughter? Or will Victoria's master plan bury her forever? Stick around to find out every gripping detail. If this has you hooked, smash that like button to show your support. Drop a comment with what you do in Sarah's shoes. Share this thriller with a friend who loves drama, and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a story like this. Let's dive in. The rain drummed against the windshield of Sarah Morrison's Range Rover like 1,000 tiny heartbeats, each drop racing down the glass in chaotic patterns that mirrored the confusion swirling in her mind. At 38, she had thought she knew what happiness looked like. It was supposed to be this moment, sitting in the parking lot of Dr. Patel's office, clutching the first ultrasound photos of her miracle baby after 3 devastating miscarriages. Her fingers traced the black and white image of her 6-month-old daughter, a perfect little profile that had taken her breath away just minutes ago. After years of fertility treatments, hormone injections, and the crushing weight of empty promises, this pregnancy had been different. This time, everything was going according to plan. The baby was healthy, growing strong, and James had finally seemed like the husband she had married 15 years ago. Sarah glanced at the passenger seat where James's iPhone lay forgotten, its screen still glowing from his last text. He had been so distracted during the appointment, checking his phone constantly while Dr. Patel showed them their daughter's tiny fingers and toes. When the device had slipped from his jacket pocket as they rushed to the car, Sarah had automatically picked it up, intending to hand it back. But James was already gone, called away to an urgent business meeting with his partner, Victoria Chen. Always Victoria these days. The brilliant 28-year-old tech prodigy who had joined Morrison Dynamics 18 months ago and somehow become indispensable to every aspect of James's life. The phone buzzed in Sarah's palm, and instinctively, she glanced down. The message preview made her blood run cold. Victoria can't wait until Sarah's gone on her wellness retreat. 3 weeks, just us in the mansion. I've missed falling asleep in your arms. Sarah's pregnant wife betrayed heart hammered against her ribs as she stared at the words that seemed to blur and refocus with each ragged breath. Her thumb moved without conscious thought, unlocking the phone with James's passcode, their anniversary date, and opening the full conversation thread. What she found there destroyed her world in the space of a heartbeat. Months of messages stretched back like a roadmap of deception. James and Victoria discussing intimate details of their relationship, making plans for romantic getaways, sharing photos that made Sarah's stomach lurch with recognition. The guest house behind their Malibu mansion, the one Victoria supposedly used for late work sessions, had been her home for over a year. Sarah's been so emotional lately with the pregnancy hormones. Thank God you understand me the way she never could. Victoria, poor baby. Don't worry. Once this is all over, we won't have to hide anymore. Your lawyers know what to do. James, I still feel guilty sometimes. She looks so hopeful about the baby. Victoria, the baby changes everything. Remember, she'll be too focused on motherhood to notice when you file. By the time she realizes what's happening, I'll already be pregnant with our child. Sarah's vision blurred as the words hit her like physical blows. Her husband affair with Mistress had been planned, calculated, and designed to coincide with the most vulnerable period of her life. The ultrasound photos slipped from her nerveless fingers, fluttering to the car floor like broken promises. The rain intensified, matching the storm building in her chest. She scrolled further back, each message revealing new layers of betrayal. They discussed her fertility struggles with clinical detachment, her miscarriages with barely concealed impatience, her hopes for this pregnancy with outright mockery. Victoria, she actually believes you want this baby. It's almost sad. James, the prenup covers everything if she can't prove infidelity. Thanks to your business partnership, no one will suspect we're anything more than colleagues. Victoria, your wife is so trusting. She even thanked me for being such a good friend to you during her difficult times. The memory crashed over Sarah like a physical blow. She had thanked Victoria multiple times for being understanding when James worked late, for supporting him during Sarah's dark periods after each miscarriage, for being the kind of business partner who truly cared about his well-being. Sarah doubled over, her pregnant belly pressed against the steering wheel as waves of nausea overwhelmed her. The cold leather seats, the expensive car, the designer maternity clothes James had insisted on buying, all of it felt like props in an elaborate stage production where she was the only one who didn't know her role. Her fingers shook as she continued reading, discovering planning sessions for her elimination from James's life. They had researched the best divorce lawyers, calculated her potential settlement, and even discussed custody arrangements for the baby she was currently carrying. James, the wellness retreat in Sedona is perfect. 3 weeks gives us time to move everything to the offshore accounts. Victoria and I'll be showing by then. Hard for her to claim infidelity when your pregnant girlfriend has been living in the guest house for business purposes. Sarah's mind reeled. Victoria was pregnant too. The text was dated 3 weeks ago, but there had been no visible signs. Then again, Sarah realized with growing horror, she hadn't been looking. She had been so focused on her own pregnancy, her own happiness, that she had missed the signs of her life being systematically dismantled. The phone buzzed again, a new message from Victoria that made Sarah's heart stop entirely. Victoria, just finished the lunch meeting with your wife's sister. Emily suspects nothing. When Sarah finds out about the baby, she'll need family support. I'll be there for her. Of course, the grieving mistress who never meant for things to go this far. Emily, her own sister, was being manipulated, positioned as an unwitting ally in Sarah's destruction. The betrayal cut so deep she could barely breathe. Sarah fumbled for her own phone, her fingers struggling to dial her sister's number through her tears. Emily answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Sarah, how did the appointment go? Did you get good pictures of my niece? Sarah's voice cracked. Where are you right now? Just finished the most interesting lunch with Victoria. You know, James's business partner. She's such a sweetheart. Sarah, she was asking all about your pregnancy, wanting to know how to best support you both during this time. I think she might have a little crush on James, though. The way she talks about him. The phone slipped from Sarah's hand as the full scope of the manipulation became clear. Victoria wasn't just stealing her husband. She was infiltrating every aspect of Sarah's support system, positioning herself as the sympathetic other woman who had been swept away by love. Rain hammered the car roof like applause for a performance Sarah hadn't realized she was giving. She stared at the ultrasound photo on the floor, her daughter's tiny face looking up at her from the wreckage of her marriage. This baby, this miracle she had prayed for, was going to be born into a broken home because her father had already chosen his new family. The passenger door suddenly opened, and James slid into the car, his expensive suit darkened by rain. He was smiling, the kind of warm, genuine expression that had made her fall in love with him in college. Sorry about that, sweetheart. Victoria needed to go over the Henderson contract details. You know how she is about crossing every T. He reached for his phone, and Sarah watched his face carefully as she handed it over. Not even a flicker of concern that she might have seen something. How was your call with your sister? He asked, starting the engine. Emily mentioned she was meeting Victoria for lunch. The casual way he mentioned it, as if it were coincidence rather than orchestration, made Sarah's stomach clench. She managed a weak smile, her acting skills apparently better than she had imagined. Fine. Emily thinks Victoria is lovely. She is, James agreed, pulling out of the parking lot. We're lucky to have her as a partner. She really understands the business in a way that... He trailed off, but Sarah could fill in the blanks, in a way that Sarah never had, in a way that mattered more than 15 years of marriage. As they drove home to their Malibu mansion, the house where Victoria had been living in secret for over a year, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to process the magnitude of her situation. She was 7 months pregnant, financially dependent on a man who was actively planning her destruction, and completely isolated from anyone who might help her see the truth. But there was something else in those messages, something that nagged at the edge of her consciousness. Victoria's confidence about the pregnancy timeline, her certainty about legal proceedings, her detailed knowledge of Sarah's personal life, it all felt too practiced, too perfect. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her reflection in the rain-streaked window. The woman staring back was older, tired, and wounded. But she wasn't broken. Not yet. And somewhere in the careful choreography of her betrayal, Victoria and James had made a mistake. They had underestimated the woman they were destroying. As they pulled into their circular driveway, Sarah noticed lights on in the guest house where Victoria supposedly worked late into the night on business proposals. Now she knew what kind of proposals were really being made in that cozy space, and something cold and determined settled in her chest. James helped her out of the car with gentle solicitude, his hand protective on her back as they walked to the front door. He was still playing the devoted husband, still maintaining the facade that was apparently scheduled to crumble in just a few weeks when she left for Sedona. "I'm going to check on Victoria," he said as they entered the marble foyer. "Make sure she got home okay from the meeting." Sarah nodded, watching him walk across their perfectly manicured backyard toward the guest house where his pregnant mistress waited. The rain had stopped, and evening light filtered through the windows of their multi-million-dollar home, highlighting the fresh flowers Victoria had arranged, the art she had helped select, the life she had been quietly infiltrating for months. But as Sarah climbed the stairs to their bedroom, ultrasound photos clutched in her hand. She wasn't thinking about what she was losing. She was thinking about what she was going to do about it. Because if Victoria Chen thought she could systematically destroy Sarah Morrison without a fight, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. The game was just beginning. Sarah Morrison had always prided herself on being the kind of woman who had it all together. Even now, sitting in her pristine white kitchen at 6 in the morning, measuring out organic prenatal vitamins and preparing fresh squeezed orange juice, she maintained the routine that had defined her life for the past decade. But today, everything felt different. Today, she was performing the role of the perfect wife while secretly planning her escape from a marriage that had become a trap. 3 days had passed since the ultrasound revelation, and Sarah had done what she did best: research. Her background in marketing had taught her the importance of understanding your competition, and Victoria Chen had just become the most important project of her life. The guest house lights had been on until nearly midnight each of the past 3 nights. Sarah had watched from her bedroom window as James made his increasingly frequent business visits, sometimes returning to the main house, sometimes staying until dawn. Each time, Sarah pretended to be asleep, listening to his careful footsteps on the hardwood floors as he slipped back into their bed. But Sarah wasn't sleeping. She was planning. The first step had been obvious: hire a professional. Maria Gonzalez came highly recommended by Sarah's divorce attorney friend, Rebecca. Though Sarah had been careful not to reveal why she needed a private investigator, Rebecca thought it was about protecting assets during a business deal, not uncovering a heartbreaking family drama that would make The Good Wife look like a romantic comedy. Maria was everything Sarah had hoped for: mid-40s, sharp-eyed, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. She had listened to Sarah's story without judgment, taking notes on a tablet while asking pointed questions that revealed the true scope of what they were dealing with. "Mrs. Morrison," Maria had said, her slight Boston accent lending authority to her words, In 20 years of doing this work, I've learned that when a betrayal feels disorganized, it usually is. Your instincts are correct. This isn't just an affair, it's a hostile takeover. Now, as Sarah prepared James's favorite breakfast, she thought about the folder hidden in her car that contained Maria's initial findings. The woman her husband was destroying their marriage for had a history that read like a masterclass in manipulation. Victoria Chen wasn't just ambitious. She was a professional relationship destroyer. Maria had traced Victoria's background through 3 previous companies, 3 previous marriages that had ended with the wives losing everything, and 3 previous identities. The woman currently living in Sarah's guest house had been Victoria Walsh in Miami, Victoria Sanders in Dallas, and Victoria Martinez in Phoenix. Each time, she had targeted successful men with vulnerable wives, integrated herself into their businesses and personal lives, and systematically dismantled their marriages from the inside. But the most devastating discovery was still to come. "Good morning, beautiful," James said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the warm smile that had once made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. He was already dressed in his navy Tom Ford suit, the one Victoria had helped him select during a business shopping trip to Beverly Hills. "Morning," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "How did you sleep, Raoul?" "Like a baby," he lied smoothly, accepting the coffee she handed him. "Victoria and I finally cracked the Henderson deal. We were up late going over the final details." Sarah nodded, watching his face carefully. The ease with which deception rolled off his tongue was remarkable. 15 years of marriage, and she was just now discovering that her husband was a masterful liar. "That's wonderful," she said, moving to the stove to flip his eggs over easy, just the way he liked them. "Victoria works so hard. I should probably invite her for dinner soon. To celebrate." James tensed almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that Sarah might have missed if she hadn't been watching for it. "She's incredibly busy right now. Maybe after the Henderson deal closes." Always deflecting, always protecting Victoria's time and space. Sarah wondered how many other wives had stood in their kitchens, making breakfast for husbands who were already planning their exits. "James," Sarah said carefully, "I've been thinking about the baby, about what kind of mother I want to be." "You're going to be amazing," he said automatically, scrolling through his phone while eating. "The best mother our daughter could ask for. I want to be the kind of mother who protects her child from people who might hurt her," Sarah continued, her hand resting on her rounded belly, "the kind who pays attention to what's really happening around her family." For the first time that morning, James looked up from his phone. "That sounds very wise. Protection is important." The irony was suffocating. Here was the man who was systematically destroying their child's family stability, agreeing that protection was important. Sarah had to grip the counter to keep from confronting him right there, in their kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. Instead, she smiled and kissed his cheek as he left for work, watching from the window as he walked across the yard to collect Victoria for their commute to the office. They had started riding together 6 months ago, another efficiency that made perfect sense from a business perspective. The moment James's Tesla disappeared down their driveway, Sarah was in her car, driving to meet Maria at a small cafe in Venice Beach. They had chosen the location carefully, far enough from Malibu to avoid accidental encounters, public enough to discourage eavesdropping. Maria was already waiting in a corner booth, her laptop open and a thick manila folder beside her coffee cup. The expression on her face told Sarah that the news wasn't good. "I found the footage you asked about," Maria said without preamble, sliding a tablet across the table. "But I need to warn you, Mrs. Morrison, this is going to be very difficult to watch." Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the tablet. The security footage from their home system was time-stamped 3 months ago, the day of her mother's funeral. Sarah remembered that day with crystal clarity, the overwhelming grief, the way James had held her as she sobbed, his gentle insistence that she stay overnight at her sister's house because being alone in the mansion would be too painful. He had been right about the pain, just wrong about the source. The footage showed James and Victoria entering the main house together less than an hour after Sarah had left. They moved through her home with casual familiarity. Victoria stopping to rearrange flowers in the foyer, James opening a bottle of wine from their private collection. They talked and laughed, their body language intimate and comfortable, as if this were routine. Then they disappeared upstairs, toward the master bedroom Sarah shared with her husband. Sarah's vision blurred as she watched the timestamp count forward. 30 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes of her husband and his mistress in her bed while she grieved her mother's death. When they finally reappeared, Victoria was wearing one of Sarah's silk robes, and James was carrying fresh sheets to the laundry room. They had made love in Sarah's bed, then changed the sheets like thoughtful house guests. Sarah bolted from the booth, barely making it to the restaurant's bathroom before the morning's orange juice came back up. She knelt on the cold tile floor, her pregnant belly pressed against the toilet seat, and sobbed until her throat was raw. When she finally returned to the table, Maria was waiting with tissues and a glass of water. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Maria said gently, "but you needed to know the timeline. The affair started during your fertility struggles. Victoria specifically targeted you during your most vulnerable period." Sarah's midlife betrayal story was even worse than she had imagined. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Based on the digital evidence. 18 months. Victoria researched your family extensively before applying for the position at Morrison Dynamics. She knew about your miscarriages, your mother's illness, your financial dependence on James. Everything." Maria opened the folder and spread documents across the table like a dealer revealing cards. Bank statements, travel records, hotel reservations, all painting a picture of a relationship that had been carefully constructed to coincide with Sarah's greatest struggles. Every time you lost a pregnancy, Victoria was there to comfort James. Every time you had a difficult day, she was available with understanding and support. She positioned herself as everything you couldn't be during your darkest periods. The manipulation was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Sarah thought about all the times she had apologized to James for being emotional, for needing space to grieve, for not being the wife she used to be, all while Victoria waited in the wings, ready to provide whatever James felt he was missing. "There's more," Maria said, pulling out a separate folder. Victoria's previous targets all followed similar patterns. Successful men with wives facing health challenges, fertility issues, or family crises. She researches their vulnerabilities, applies for positions in their companies, and slowly replaces them in every aspect of their husbands' lives. Sarah stared at the photos of Victoria's previous victims. 3 women, all roughly Sarah's age, all with the same hollow expression of women who had lost everything they thought was permanent. Wives who had trusted the wrong people, believed in promises that were already broken before they were made. "What happened to them?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Divorced, financially devastated, and isolated from their support systems. Victoria is very good at making the wives look unstable during proceedings. Emotional outbursts, accusations that seem paranoid, behavior that appears irrational to outside observers. The pattern was forming in Sarah's mind like a photograph developing in chemicals. Victoria wasn't just stealing her husband. She was setting Sarah up to lose everything, including custody of their daughter. "But here's the thing," Maria continued, leaning forward. "Victoria has never dealt with a target who discovered the truth this early in the process. You have advantages the other women didn't have." Sarah wiped her eyes, trying to focus on what Maria was telling her. "What kind of advantages?" "You're financially sophisticated. You have professional connections. And most importantly, you're still pregnant. Victoria's previous victims were all post-fertility or dealing with chronic health issues. Your pregnancy gives you legal protections and public sympathy that the others didn't have." For the first time in days, Sarah felt something other than despair. Hope was dangerous. She knew, but it was also powerful. "What do we do next?" she asked. Maria smiled, and Sarah saw something predatory in her expression. "We investigate Victoria the same way she investigated you. We find her vulnerabilities, her mistakes, her lies, and then we use them to protect you and your daughter. As they planned their next steps, Sarah felt a shift in her mindset. She was no longer the victimized wife, the woman who had been betrayed and abandoned. She was a mother protecting her child, a woman fighting for her future, and a force that Victoria Chen had seriously underestimated. The perfect life had been a perfect lie, but Sarah was done being a character in someone else's story. She was ready to write her own ending. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah was supposed to be at her weekly prenatal yoga class in Santa Monica. Instead, she was sitting in Maria's surveillance van outside the Morrison Dynamics headquarters, watching her husband's office building through high-powered cameras while the private investigator explained exactly how comprehensive Victoria's manipulation had been. Professional husband affair with mistress operations follow patterns, Maria said, adjusting the focus on a telephoto lens. Victoria's been running the same playbook for 7 years, and she's perfected it to an art form. On the laptop screen between them, Maria had compiled a timeline that read like a military campaign. Victoria had spent 3 months researching James before ever applying for the position at Morrison Dynamics. She had studied his business history, his marriage patterns, his social media presence, and most devastatingly, Sarah's fertility struggles that had been documented in a blog she had kept during their first rounds of IVF. She knew about every miscarriage, every failed implantation, every hormonal breakdown you went through, Maria explained, pulling up archive posts from Sarah's blog. She positioned herself as the anti-Sarah Young, fertile, emotionally available when you couldn't be. Sarah stared at her own words on the screen, posts she had written during her darkest moments, thinking she was connecting with other women who understood infertility's particular brand of grief. Instead, she had been providing a roadmap for her own destruction. I wrote about everything, Sarah whispered. How James and I were struggling to connect, how the treatments were affecting our intimacy, how I felt like I was failing as a wife. Victoria read every word, Maria confirmed. Then she crafted her entire personality around being your opposite. When you were struggling with hormones, she was steady. When you needed space to grieve, she was available. When you felt sexually inadequate, she became the perfect office wife. The term office wife hit Sarah like a physical blow. That's exactly what Victoria had become. The woman who understood James's business pressures, who celebrated his victories, who provided emotional support during challenging deals. Everything Sarah had once been before fertility treatments consumed her life and left her feeling like a broken version of herself. Through the surveillance equipment, they watched James and Victoria leave the building together for lunch. Even from a distance, their body language told the story, his hand on her lower back as they walked, her animated conversation that made him laugh, the casual intimacy of a couple who had moved far beyond professional boundaries. "We need to get closer," Sarah said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with." Maria studied her carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for that? Seeing them together in public is different from looking at security footage." Sarah thought about her daughter, currently doing somersaults in her belly, blissfully unaware that her family was being systematically destroyed before she was even born. "I'm ready." They followed James and Victoria to Il Cielo, an intimate Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills that Sarah recognized with a sick lurch. It was where James had taken her for their 5th anniversary, where he had promised they would bring their children someday for family celebrations. Maria parked across the street with a clear view of the outdoor patio where James and Victoria were being seated. Through the surveillance equipment, Sarah could see Victoria's hand resting casually on James's thigh as they studied their menus, could watch her lean in to whisper something that made him smile with genuine warmth. The woman destroying her marriage was beautiful in a completely different way than Sarah, where Sarah was blonde and soft around the edges, especially now with pregnancy. Victoria was dark-haired and angular, all sharp cheekbones and designer clothes that emphasized her lean figure. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world, who had never experienced the particular vulnerability of wanting something her body couldn't provide. "She's not showing," Sarah observed. studying Victoria's profile through the camera. If she's really pregnant, where's the bump? Maria adjusted the lens for a closer look. That's what I've been wondering. Based on the timeline in James's messages, she should be at least 4 months along. But look at her clothes, her posture, the way she's sitting. Victoria was wearing a fitted black dress that would have been impossible to wear comfortably with a protruding belly. Her posture was straight and confident, none of the careful positioning that became second nature during pregnancy. She drank what appeared to be wine with lunch, gesturing animatedly without the cautious movements of someone protecting a developing baby. I don't think she's pregnant, Sarah said slowly. I think she's lying. That would fit her pattern, Maria agreed. Create urgency, force decisions, present James with a deadline for choosing between his old life and his new one. As they watched, Victoria pulled out a folder and spread documents across the table. Even from their distance, Sarah could see that this was more than a casual lunch. This was a business meeting disguised as a romantic meal, complete with papers that required signatures. Can you get audio on what they're discussing? Sarah asked. Maria shook her head. Too far away, too much ambient noise. But I can tell you what those documents probably are. What are divorce papers, custody agreements, financial settlements? Victoria's previous targets all described similar lunch meetings where they were presented with documents that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Sarah's blood ran cold. He's going to divorce me over lunch. No, Maria said grimly. He's going to let Victoria handle the divorce. She'll present it as the loving thing to do, the way to protect you from a long, drawn-out legal battle. She'll position herself as the reluctant other woman who's trying to minimize damage to everyone involved. The psychological manipulation was breathtaking. Sarah could already imagine how Victoria would frame it. She and James had fallen in love despite their best efforts to resist. They wanted to handle the situation with dignity and respect for Sarah's condition. They hoped to maintain an amicable relationship for the sake of the children. Children, plural, because Victoria would be pregnant with James's second child, the one he actually wanted with the woman he actually loved. I need to confront him, Sarah said, her hand moving protectively to her belly. I need to tell him I know. That would be the worst possible thing you could do right now, Maria said firmly. Victoria's entire strategy depends on you reacting emotionally, making accusations that sound paranoid, giving them ammunition to use against you in court. So what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and watch my husband plan my destruction over tiramisu? Maria pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the others. We gather evidence, we document everything, and we find Victoria's weakness. She doesn't have any weaknesses. She's perfect. That's the entire point. Nobody's perfect. Mrs. Morrison, Victoria's been running this con for 7 years, which means she's made mistakes. We just need to find them. Maria opened the folder to reveal surveillance photos from Victoria's previous operations. The same restaurant meetings, the same document signings, the same intimate body language with different men in different cities. Look at this, Maria said, pointing to a photo from Victoria's time in Dallas. See how she's sitting with her mark, same position as today, same dress style, same drink choice, same seductive posture. Sarah studied the images, seeing the pattern Maria was highlighting. Victoria's behavior wasn't spontaneous or authentic. It was rehearsed, repeated, perfected through practice. She's an actress playing a role, Sarah realized. Exactly. And actresses make mistakes when they perform the same role too many times. They get lazy. They miss details. They assume no one is paying attention to the performance. Through the surveillance equipment, they watched James sign several documents while Victoria held his free hand. The intimacy of the gesture was clearly practiced, designed to make the business transaction feel like a romantic moment. We need to find her previous victims, Sarah said suddenly. The women she destroyed before me. They must have seen patterns, noticed things, discovered information that could help. Maria smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already made contact with two of them. They're willing to talk. As they drove away from the restaurant, leaving James and Victoria to continue their performance, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The crushing despair was being replaced by something sharper, more focused. Victoria Chen might be a professional destroyer of marriages, but she had never faced a victim who discovered the truth while there was still time to fight back. The midlife betrayal story that Victoria thought she was writing was about to take a very different turn, because Sarah Morrison was done being a supporting character in someone else's drama. She was ready to become the leading lady in her own story of survival and justice, and Victoria was about to discover that some women fight back harder when they're protecting their unborn children. The first catastrophe struck on a Wednesday morning when Sarah was 32 weeks pregnant, exactly 1 week before her scheduled departure for the wellness retreat in Sedona that would give James and Victoria 3 weeks to finalize their plans. Sarah had been feeling unusually tired, but she attributed it to the stress of secretly investigating her husband's affair while maintaining the facade of the trusting wife. She was in the nursery, folding tiny onesies and imagining the life her daughter would have once Victoria was exposed and removed from their lives. When the cramping started, at first it felt like Braxton Hicks contractions, the practice contractions her doctor had warned her about. But these didn't fade after a few minutes of rest and deep breathing. These got stronger. No, 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 Sarah whispered, clutching the crib rail as another wave of pain crashed over her. Not now. Please, not now. But her body wasn't listening to her desperation. The contractions were coming every 5 minutes, hard enough to take her breath away. And when she felt the warm gush of fluid between her legs, she knew with horrible certainty that her daughter was coming 8 weeks too early. Sarah managed to call 911 before the next contraction doubled her over, and by the time the paramedics arrived, she was on her bathroom floor, screaming for her baby's life while James's phone went straight to voicemail. The ambulance ride to Cedars-Sinai was a blur of sirens and medical equipment, and paramedics asking questions Sarah couldn't focus on answering. All she could think about was the statistics her fertility doctor had drilled into her head. Babies born at 32 weeks had good survival rates, but they faced weeks or months in the NICU, potential developmental delays, breathing problems, feeding issues. Her daughter wasn't supposed to enter the world fighting for every breath. She was supposed to be born full-term and healthy into a stable, loving family that existed only in Sarah's increasingly desperate imagination. Mrs. Morrison, we need you to try to slow down the labor, Dr. Martinez was saying as they wheeled her into the delivery room. We're going to give you medication to try to stop the contractions. Where's my husband? Sarah gasped between contractions. Someone needs to call James. He needs to be here. But James's phone continued going to voicemail. And when the hospital finally reached Morrison Dynamics, they were told he was in an important meeting and couldn't be disturbed. Sarah's sister, Emily, was in New York on business. Her parents were dead, and the only person she could think to call was Maria, who arrived at the hospital just as the doctors gave up trying to stop Sarah's labor. Your daughter is coming today, Dr. Martinez announced. We're going to do everything we can to make sure she's okay. Emily Rose Morrison was born at 3:47 p.m., weighing 3 pounds and 11 ounces, and Sarah got exactly 30 seconds to see her daughter's tiny, perfect face before the NICU team whisked her away to the specialized unit, where she would spend the next several months learning how to breathe and eat and exist in a world she wasn't supposed to enter for another 2 months. James arrived 20 minutes later, his face pale with what looked like genuine concern, until Sarah saw Victoria hovering in the hallway behind him. Even during his wife's medical emergency, even during the premature birth of his daughter, he had brought his mistress to the hospital. Sarah, my God, James said, rushing to her bedside. Are you okay? Is the baby okay? They told me she was born early. Sarah stared at him through the haze of medication and exhaustion and grief. This man who was supposed to protect her and their child had been unreachable during the most terrifying moments of her life, because he was probably planning their destruction with the woman who was now pretending to comfort him in the hallway. She's in the NICU, Sarah said, her voice flat and emotionless. She's fighting for her life. But she's going to be okay, James pressed. The doctors said she's going to be okay. I don't know, Sarah whispered. Nobody knows. For the next 3 hours, while Emily struggled to breathe on her own and Sarah recovered from delivery, Victoria maintained a vigil in the waiting room. She brought James coffee, held his hand when he broke down crying, and provided exactly the kind of emotional support that Sarah couldn't offer from her hospital bed. The second catastrophe arrived via FedEx the following morning, while Sarah was trying to pump breast milk for a daughter she couldn't hold. The legal documents were delivered to her hospital room with the kind of efficiency that suggested they had been prepared well in advance of Emily's early arrival. Victoria Chen was suing for palimony, claiming she had been in a common-law marriage with James Morrison for over a year. She was demanding half of Morrison Dynamics, half of the Malibu mansion, and ongoing financial support for the child she claimed to be carrying. But the most devastating part of the lawsuit wasn't the financial demands. It was the detailed documentation of Sarah's unstable mental health during her pregnancy. Victoria had compiled a psychological profile that painted Sarah as an emotionally volatile woman who posed a potential threat to her newborn daughter. The documents cited Sarah's fertility blog posts about depression and anxiety during IVF treatments. They referenced her obsessive behavior regarding Victoria's role in the company, which Victoria claimed had escalated to stalking and harassment. They included testimony from Emily, Sarah's own sister, describing Sarah's recent paranoid accusations about Victoria and James. Sarah realized with growing horror that every conversation she'd had with Emily about her suspicions had been carefully relayed to Victoria, who had used them as evidence of Sarah's deteriorating mental state. Her sister, trying to be supportive, had provided ammunition for Sarah's destruction. "This is insane," Sarah told her lawyer, Rebecca, who had rushed to the hospital after receiving the documents. "This is all lies." "It doesn't matter if it's lies," Rebecca said grimly. "It matters if they can make it look true. And Victoria has done an excellent job of creating a paper trail that supports her narrative." The third catastrophe was already building while Sarah tried to process the legal assault on her sanity and her future. Victoria's claims about Sarah's mental health had been leaked to several gossip blogs, and by that evening, the story was trending on social media. "Billionaire's wife can't keep her man satisfied" was the headline that hurt the most, accompanied by photos of Sarah looking exhausted and emotional during her pregnancy. Someone had leaked photos from her social media accounts, carefully selected to show her at her worst moments, combined with speculation about her fertility struggles and suggestions that her desperation for a baby had driven James into another woman's arms. The hashtag #NarnerBarrenWife was trending by midnight, with thousands of comments from strangers who felt qualified to judge Sarah's worth as a woman based on her reproductive history. The cruelest comments came from other women, mothers who seemed to take personal offense at Sarah's fertility struggles, as if her inability to conceive easily was a moral failing that justified her husband's betrayal. Sarah scrolled through the comments on her phone while sitting beside Emily's NICU bed, watching her daughter's tiny chest rise and fall with the help of machines, and felt her world collapse completely. Maybe if she'd been a better wife, he wouldn't have needed to find love elsewhere. One comment read, "Some women just aren't meant to be mothers. Nature has a way of correcting these things," said another. "She should be grateful he gave her a baby at all. Now she can focus on being a single mom instead of trying to trap a man who doesn't want her." The comments went on for hours. Thousands of strangers dissecting her marriage, her body, her worth as a human being. Photos of Victoria began circulating alongside the cruelest posts, showing a young, beautiful, apparently pregnant woman who represented everything Sarah wasn't: fertile, confident, and wanted. Sarah set her phone aside and looked at her daughter through the clear walls of the incubator. Emily was so small, so vulnerable, surrounded by tubes and wires that were keeping her alive. This tiny person was depending on Sarah to protect her, to fight for her, to ensure she had a stable future. But how could Sarah protect her daughter when she couldn't even protect herself? The reflection in the NICU window showed a woman Sarah barely recognized, hollow-eyed, exhausted, publicly humiliated, and completely alone. James had gone home hours ago, claiming he needed to handle the media situation, which Sarah suspected meant strategizing with Victoria about how to control the narrative. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Don't read the comments. Don't engage with the media. Focus on your daughter. We're going to fight back." But as Sarah sat in that sterile hospital room, watching her premature daughter fight for every breath while strangers on the internet celebrated her public destruction, fighting back felt impossible. Victoria had played her perfectly, using Sarah's love for her daughter against her, turning her desperation to protect Emily into evidence of instability. Every maternal instinct, every protective impulse, had been weaponized and used to paint Sarah as unfit for motherhood. The pregnant wife betrayed had become the unfit mother, and Victoria's master plan was working exactly as designed. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to find strength she didn't know she possessed. Because somewhere in the carefully orchestrated destruction of her life, Victoria and James had made a mistake, and Sarah was going to find it. The detective's call came at 2:17 a.m., while Sarah kept vigil beside Emily's incubator, watching her daughter's oxygen levels fluctuate on the monitors that had become the soundtrack to her sleepless nights. Detective Ray Coleman introduced himself as a member of the Miami-Dade Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen enough deception to recognize it from across the country. "Mrs. Morrison," he said carefully, "I understand you're dealing with a civil matter involving a Victoria Chen. I'm calling because her real name is Victoria Castellanos, and she's wanted for questioning in connection with the disappearance of Margaret Whitmore." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Disappearance. Mrs. Whitmore was the wife of tech entrepreneur David Whitmore. She vanished 3 years ago, shortly after filing for divorce and claiming her husband was having an affair with his business partner, a woman named Victoria Walsh. The case went cold when Victoria Walsh disappeared as well, but we recently discovered that Victoria Walsh and Victoria Chen are the same person. Through the NICU window, Sarah could see the nurses changing shifts, the quiet efficiency of medical professionals who understood that some battles were fought in whispers and careful movements. Emily was stable tonight, her breathing steady, her tiny fingers curled around the little knitted hat Emily had brought before disappearing on her New York business trip that Sarah now suspected wasn't business at all. "What happened to Margaret Whitmore?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "That's what we're trying to determine." She filed for divorce on a Monday, claiming she had evidence of financial fraud. By Friday, she had withdrawn the filing, liquidated her personal assets, and left town. Her car was found at Miami International Airport, but there's no record of her boarding any flights. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where Emily had been safe just weeks ago, protected from the world that was trying to destroy them both. "Do you think Victoria killed her?" "I think Victoria Castellanos is very good at making problems disappear," Detective Coleman said. "And I think you might be her next problem." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Detective Coleman explaining the pattern they had discovered once they started looking. Victoria's previous targets hadn't just lost their marriages and their money, they had lost themselves entirely. The women either disappeared completely or suffered what appeared to be complete psychological breakdowns that left them unable to care for themselves, much less fight for their rights in court. "She's not just a gold digger, Mrs. Morrison. She's a predator who specializes in destroying women's minds." After the call ended, Sarah sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair and tried to process what she had learned. Victoria wasn't just stealing her husband. She was following a pattern that had already claimed at least one life. The midlife betrayal story Sarah thought she was living was actually a horror story with potentially deadly consequences. But Detective Coleman had also given her something she desperately needed: hope. "We've been building a case against her for 18 months, he had explained. "If you're willing to cooperate, to help us document her current operation, you might be the key to bringing her down." Sarah looked at Emily, whose tiny chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, and made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She wasn't just fighting for her marriage anymore. She was fighting to ensure that Victoria Chen never destroyed another family. The next morning brought visitors Sarah hadn't expected. Maria arrived with coffee and two women who looked remarkably like Sarah, well-dressed, exhausted, and carrying the particular weight of women who had lost everything they thought was permanent. "Sarah Morrison, meet Linda Walsh and Jennifer Sanders," Maria said, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chairs that had become their war room. Victoria's previous targets. Linda was a petite blonde in her early 40s who moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to trust her own judgment. Jennifer was taller, darker, with the kind of expensive maintenance that suggested she had once had the money to afford it. "We've been following your story," Linda said softly. "When we saw the news reports, we knew it was her." "Victoria destroyed my marriage in Dallas," Jennifer added. "But she didn't stop there. She systematically eliminated every aspect of my support system, turned my friends against me, convinced my family I was having a mental breakdown." "How?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand the scope of Victoria's psychological warfare. "The same way she's doing it to you," Linda explained. "She documents everything you do, everything you say, and then reframes it as evidence of instability. Your fertility struggles become evidence that you're obsessed with pregnancy. Your investigation of her becomes evidence that you're paranoid and potentially dangerous." Jennifer pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah social media screenshots that made her stomach clench. "Look familiar." The posts were eerily similar to what Sarah was experiencing, photos carefully selected to show the wives at their worst moments, comments from friends expressing concern about their behavior, speculation about their mental health framed as compassionate worry. "She creates a narrative where you're the unstable wife who's driven your husband away," Linda continued. "Then she positions herself as the victim of your increasingly erratic behavior. By the time you realize what's happening, everyone around you believes you're dangerous." "But you survived," Sarah said, looking between the two women. "You're here. You're fighting back." Linda and Jennifer exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't interpret. "We survived," Jennifer said carefully. "But we didn't win. Victoria took everything from both of us. Our marriages, our money, our reputations, our relationships with our children." "Children!" Sarah's voice cracked. "Victoria's particularly effective at convincing courts that her targets are unfit mothers," Linda explained. "She documents every moment of stress, every emotional outburst, every sign that motherhood is overwhelming you. Then she presents it as evidence that you're a danger to your own children." Sarah felt the familiar wave of nausea that had become her constant companion. "So you lost custody, limited visitation," Jennifer said. "My ex-husband remarried Victoria 6 months after our divorce was finalized. She became my children's stepmother, and now they call her mom because she's proven herself to be the stable, nurturing influence in their lives." The psychological torture was more sophisticated than Sarah had imagined. Victoria didn't just steal husbands. She stole entire identities, entire futures, entire families. "But here's what we've learned," Linda said, her voice growing stronger. "Victoria makes mistakes when she's working multiple targets simultaneously. She's been using the same techniques for 7 years, and she's getting sloppy." Maria opened her laptop and pulled up a series of documents. "Linda and Jennifer have been working with Detective Coleman to track Victoria's current operation, and they found something interesting. Victoria isn't just targeting you," Jennifer explained. "She's been researching 3 other families simultaneously, wealthy men with vulnerable wives, all in different stages of her process. Which means," Linda added, "she's spreading herself thin, making errors, using identical language in communications with different targets." Maria turned the laptop toward Sarah, showing her email threads that were disturbingly familiar. Victoria had sent nearly identical messages to multiple men, expressing concern about their wives' emotional instability and offering herself as a source of support and understanding. "She's copy-pasting her seductions," Maria said, "using the same psychological profiles, the same manipulation techniques, even the same restaurant choices for her important meetings." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt something other than despair. Victoria's professional approach to destroying marriages meant she had created patterns that could be documented, predicted, and ultimately used against her. "There's more," Linda said, pulling out a folder. "We've been in contact with Margaret Whitmore's sister in Orlando. Margaret didn't disappear. She's been hiding, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to come forward." "She's alive?" Sarah asked. "Very much alive," Jennifer confirmed. "And very angry. She's been working with a federal task force to build a case against Victoria for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Victoria has been running this operation across state lines for years," Maria explained. "That makes it a federal crime. And when she started manipulating your pregnancy and using it to claim you're unfit for motherhood, she crossed lines that even her previous operations hadn't touched." Sarah looked at Emily through the NICU window, her daughter sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding her young life. This tiny person was depending on Sarah to protect her, not just from Victoria's immediate threats, but from a future where predators like Victoria could destroy families with impunity. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah asked. Linda smiled for the first time since entering the hospital room. "We need you to be exactly what Victoria expects the desperate, emotional wife who's losing her mind. But this time, we're going to document every move she makes in response. You're going to give Victoria enough rope to hang herself," Jennifer added, "and we're going to be watching when she does it." As Sarah listened to their plan unfold, she realized that Victoria had made a critical error in her psychological assessment. She had assumed that Sarah's love for her daughter would make her weak, desperate, and easily manipulated. But Victoria had never encountered a mother who was willing to temporarily sacrifice her own dignity to protect her child's future. The pregnant wife betrayed was about to become the avenging mother, and Victoria Chen was about to discover that some women are most dangerous when they have nothing left to lose. Sarah's transformation began in the most unlikely place, the NICU family lounge at 3 a.m., surrounded by other parents whose children were fighting for their lives. She was reading Eat, Pray, Love for the third time since Emily's birth. Not because she found Elizabeth Gilbert's journey particularly inspiring, but because the book represented something Victoria couldn't take away from her, the possibility of reinvention. "The only thing more unthinkable than leaving was staying," Sarah whispered, reading Gilbert's words aloud to Emily during her morning feeding time. "The only thing more impossible than going was not going." Emily's tiny fingers wrapped around Sarah's pinky with surprising strength, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't about saving her marriage anymore. This was about building a life worthy of her daughter's trust. The plan Linda and Jennifer had outlined was simple in concept, but required Sarah to do something that went against every instinct she had, to let Victoria think she was winning while secretly documenting everything. She had to appear to be having the breakdown Victoria expected, while actually building a case that would protect other families from similar destruction. "Think of it as a method acting," Maria had explained. "You're playing the role of the unstable wife while actually being the strong woman gathering evidence." The first step was forming a real support system to replace the fake one Victoria had infiltrated. Dr. Williams, Sarah's therapist, turned out to be an unexpected ally. When Sarah finally told her the truth about discovering James's affair and Victoria's pattern of targeting vulnerable women, Dr. Williams's professional demeanor shifted to something more personal. "I've been treating women like you for 15 years, Dr. Williams said during what Sarah had expected to be a routine session. "Women who seem to be having breakdowns that don't quite fit the typical patterns. Now I'm wondering how many of them were actually victims of systematic psychological manipulation." Dr. Williams agreed to help document Sarah's actual mental state while providing her with tools to handle the stress of her double life. "What you're describing isn't paranoia or postpartum depression," she explained. "It's a completely rational response to discovering that your reality has been constructed by someone else." The validation was more powerful than any medication. For weeks, Sarah had been questioning her own perceptions, wondering if she really was becoming the unstable woman Victoria claimed she was. Having a mental health professional confirm that her reactions were normal and justified gave her the foundation she needed to start fighting back. James's sister Claire provided another unexpected source of support. She arrived at the hospital unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, carrying flowers and wearing an expression Sarah had never seen before, guilt mixed with determination. "I need to tell you something," Claire said without preamble. "About Victoria, about things I noticed but didn't think were important." Claire had spent Christmas dinner at their house 6 months ago, back when Sarah still believed Victoria was simply James's dedicated business partner. But Claire had noticed things that Sarah, in her pregnancy-induced exhaustion, had missed. "Victoria knew where everything was in your kitchen," Claire explained. "Not just the obvious things like glasses and plates, but the specialized items like your good measuring cups and your mother's recipe box. She moved through your house like she lived there." "She did live there," Sarah said bitterly. "In the guest house." "No, Sarah. She moved through the main house like she lived there. She knew which bathroom upstairs had the good towels, which bedroom had the best lighting for reading. She had been spending time in your private spaces when you weren't there." The revelation shouldn't have been surprising given everything else Sarah had discovered, but it still felt like a violation of a different magnitude. Victoria hadn't just been stealing her husband. She had been living in Sarah's home, using her belongings, occupying her space. "There's more," Claire continued. "I overheard her on the phone that night. She was talking to someone about timeline adjustments and backup plans. It sounded like a business conversation, but she was discussing you and James like you were a project." Claire's observations, combined with Detective Coleman's investigation and the evidence Linda and Jennifer had gathered, painted a picture of Victoria as someone who operated multiple cons simultaneously. She wasn't just a woman who had fallen in love with a married man. She was a professional who specialized in destroying families for profit. But the most important piece of Sarah's new support system was the unexpected ally she found in Dr. Michael Chen, Emily's primary NICU physician. Dr. Chen was exactly the kind of man Sarah would have been attracted to in another life, intelligent, compassionate, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. He treated Emily with the same careful attention he gave to every baby in his care, regardless of their parents' ability to pay or their family circumstances. "Your daughter is a fighter," he told Sarah during one of their daily updates. "Premature babies often have an extra reserve of determination. It's like they know they have to work harder than other children." Sarah found herself looking forward to these conversations, not because she was romantically interested in Dr. Chen, but because he represented something she had almost forgotten existed: a man who kept his promises, who showed up when he said he would, who treated her with respect and honesty. "Can I ask you something personal?" Dr. Chen said one evening while they watched Emily sleep. "Are you taking care of yourself during all this? I know the NICU can be overwhelming, but you look like you're carrying more stress than just your daughter's health." Sarah almost laughed at the understatement. "It's been a complicated few weeks. If you ever need someone to talk to," he said carefully, "someone who doesn't know anything about your situation except that you're a mother who loves her daughter, I'm a good listener." The offer was so simple, so free of agenda or manipulation, that Sarah almost started crying right there in the NICU. When had she become so accustomed to deception that basic human kindness felt like a miracle? "Thank you," she said. "I might take you up on that." As Emily grew stronger and Sarah's secret investigation deepened, she began to understand what Elizabeth Gilbert had meant about the difference between leaving and staying. Sarah wasn't leaving her marriage. Her marriage had already left her. She was simply catching up to reality and deciding what to build in its place. The evidence against Victoria was mounting. Maria had documented financial irregularities at Morrison Dynamics that suggested Victoria had been systematically draining company accounts into offshore investments that would be impossible to trace during divorce proceedings. Linda and Jennifer had connected Victoria to two additional families in Seattle and Phoenix, both following identical patterns of infiltration and destruction. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source: Victoria herself. Sarah was visiting Emily late one evening when she heard voices in the hospital corridor outside the NICU. James and Victoria were having what they clearly thought was a private conversation, unaware that Sarah was still in the building. "The wife is becoming a problem," Victoria was saying. "She's been asking too many questions, making too many calls. We need to accelerate the timeline." "Sarah's just stressed about the baby," James replied. "Once Emily comes home and things settle down—" "James, listen to me. Your wife is not going to settle down. She's investigating us. She hired a private investigator. She's been talking to lawyers." Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding as she listened to them discuss her like she was a business obstacle to be managed. "How do you know that?" James asked. "Because I've been monitoring her communications. Email, phone records, credit card statements. She's building a case against us." The casual way Victoria admitted to stalking her was chilling, but what came next was worse. "So what do we do?" James asked. "We implement the backup plan, the one we discussed for handling resistant targets." "Victoria, I'm not comfortable with—" "Your comfort isn't the priority here, James. Your wife is threatening everything we've worked for. She could expose the entire operation, not just what we're doing to her. Operation." Victoria had just confirmed that Sarah's destruction was part of a larger business plan, exactly as Detective Coleman had suspected. "What's the backup plan?" James asked, and Sarah held her breath waiting for the answer. "Involuntary commitment. We document her increasingly erratic behavior, get testimony from family and friends about her declining mental state, and have her committed for psychiatric evaluation. Once she's been institutionalized, even temporarily, her credibility in any legal proceeding becomes worthless." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Victoria wasn't just planning to destroy her reputation. She was planning to have her declared mentally incompetent. "By the time she gets out," Victoria continued, "if she gets out, you'll have full custody of the baby, and I'll be established as the stable stepmother. Game over." As their voices faded down the corridor, Sarah remained frozen against the wall, processing what she had overheard. Victoria's backup plan was to have her institutionalized, separated from Emily, declared unfit for motherhood based on manufactured evidence of mental illness. But Victoria had made a critical error. She had revealed her plan while Sarah was in a position to record it. Sarah pulled out her phone and realized she had been recording voice memos for Emily, little messages she planned to save until her daughter was old enough to hear them. The recording function had captured the entire conversation. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, Sarah smiled with genuine satisfaction. Victoria's confidence had made her careless, and that carelessness was about to become the foundation of her destruction. Sarah looked through the NICU window at Emily, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her mother had just recorded the evidence that would protect their future. "Your mama's learning how to fight, baby girl," Sarah whispered, "and we're going to win." The pregnant wife betrayed was becoming the warrior mother, and Victoria Chen was about to discover that some battles have consequences she never anticipated. The invitation to return home came on a Friday afternoon when Emily was 6 weeks old and finally stable enough for Sarah to consider leaving the hospital for more than a few hours at a time. James appeared in the NICU family lounge carrying coffee and wearing the expression Sarah had once found irresistibly charming, slightly sheepish, hopeful, and apparently sincere. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside her. "About everything. About our marriage. About Victoria. About our future." Sarah looked up from the breast pump she had been cleaning, the mundane task that had become a meditation during Emily's long hospitalization. "What about our future? I've been thinking," James continued, his voice carrying the kind of weighted sincerity that Sarah now recognized as carefully rehearsed. "About what's really important, family, our daughter, the life we built together." For a moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel the flicker of hope that Victoria had predicted she would feel. This was the moment she had dreamed about during her darkest hours, James coming to his senses, choosing his family over his mistress, fighting for their marriage. "I want you to come home," he said, "to the mansion. Victoria has moved back to her apartment. We need time to reconnect, To figure out how to move forward as Emily's parents, Sarah studied his face carefully, looking for the micro-expressions Maria had taught her to recognize. The slight tension around his eyes that indicated stress. The way he touched his wedding ring when he was being dishonest. The careful modulation of his voice that suggested he was delivering lines rather than speaking from his heart. "What about the lawsuit?" Sarah asked. "Victoria's claims about your relationship." "Legal nonsense," James said dismissively. "My lawyers are handling it." Victoria was confused about our professional relationship, the stress of the business, the pressure of working so closely together. She developed feelings that weren't reciprocated. The lie was delivered with such practiced ease that Sarah almost admired its audacity. James was rewriting their entire story, casting Victoria as the delusional employee rather than his pregnant mistress, positioning himself as the loyal husband who had been misunderstood. "I want to believe you," Sarah said carefully, and she was surprised to realize that part of her statement was true. Despite everything she knew, despite the evidence she had gathered, there was still a part of her that wanted to return to the life they had shared before Victoria's arrival. "Then come home," James pressed. "Let's work on our marriage. Let's focus on Emily. Let's be the family we always planned to be." Sarah thought about the recording on her phone, Victoria's voice explaining the backup plan to have her institutionalized. She thought about Detective Coleman's investigation, Linda and Jennifer's warnings, and Margaret Whitmore's narrow escape from complete destruction. But she also thought about Emily, sleeping peacefully in her incubator, and the possibility that James might genuinely be choosing their family over whatever relationship he had built with Victoria. "Okay," Sarah said. "I'll come home." James's relief seemed genuine, and for a moment Sarah wondered if she was making a mistake. Maybe Victoria really had been the manipulator, and James was just another victim of her psychological games. Maybe their marriage could be salvaged if Victoria was truly out of the picture. The mansion felt different when Sarah returned that evening. Cleaner, somehow, less cluttered. The flowers Victoria had been arranging were gone, replaced by simpler arrangements that felt more like Sarah's aesthetic. Victoria's personal touches had been systematically removed, leaving the house feeling more like the home Sarah remembered from before their lives had been invaded. "I had Mrs. Rodriguez give the guest house a thorough cleaning," James explained as he carried Sarah's hospital bag upstairs. "New locks, fresh paint, everything Victoria might have touched." The gesture felt significant, like James was literally erasing Victoria's presence from their lives. Sarah allowed herself to hope that maybe, possibly, they could rebuild something real from the wreckage of their trust. That hope lasted exactly 48 hours. On Sunday evening, while James was supposedly at the office handling a client emergency, Sarah received a text from an unknown number. "Gas leak in the main house. Evacuation ordered. Meet me at the guest house for safety." The message was professional, urgent, and completely consistent with the kind of infrastructure problems that occasionally affected their neighborhood. Sarah was gathering her purse and keys when she noticed the signature line, V. Chen, Morrison Dynamics Safety Coordinator. Victoria was still involved with the company, still had access to their home, still possessed the authority to order evacuations. James's story about her moving out and having no further contact was another lie in a relationship that had apparently been built on lies. But Sarah had learned something important during her weeks of investigation. When predators think they have trapped their prey, they often reveal their true nature. Instead of fleeing or calling for help, Sarah decided to walk into Victoria's trap with her phone recording everything. The guest house looked exactly as it had for the past 18 months, lived in, comfortable, and thoroughly established as Victoria's home. Personal photographs lined the mantel. Expensive toiletries filled the bathroom, and the refrigerator was stocked with Victoria's preferred organic foods. Victoria was waiting in the living room, no longer bothering to hide her pregnancy bump with careful clothing and strategic positioning. She was clearly at least 6 months along, possibly more, which meant her timeline claims had been accurate, and James had been lying about that as well. "Hello, Sarah," Victoria said with a smile that no longer pretended to be friendly. Thank you for coming. We need to have a conversation. About what? Sarah asked, settling into a chair and discreetly starting her phone's recording function. About your future. About Emily's future. About the choices you're going to make in the next few weeks. Victoria moved around the room with casual confidence, clearly comfortable in the space she had been occupying for over a year. This wasn't a guest house. It was Victoria's home, and Sarah was the visitor. James tells me you've been investigating our relationship, Victoria continued. Hiring private investigators, recording conversations, gathering evidence for some kind of legal action. James tells you a lot of things, Sarah replied. James tells me everything, Victoria corrected, including the fact that you recorded our conversation at the hospital last week. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't told anyone about the recording except Maria, which meant James had somehow discovered it and shared the information with Victoria. The recording where you discussed having me institutionalized? Sarah asked. Victoria laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. The recording where I described the standard procedure for handling resistant targets in business negotiations? You have a very creative interpretation of normal business language. The gaslighting was sophisticated and immediate. Victoria was already reframing the conversation, preparing to claim that Sarah had misunderstood professional terminology and twisted it into evidence of conspiracy. But here's the thing about recordings, Victoria continued, moving to the windows and drawing the curtains closed. They can be edited, manipulated, taken out of context. They're not as valuable as evidence as people think they are. What do you want from me? Sarah asked, beginning to understand that this conversation wasn't going to end with her walking back to the main house. I want you to understand your situation, Victoria said, turning back to face her. You're a woman with a history of mental health struggles, currently dealing with postpartum depression and the stress of a premature baby. You've been making increasingly paranoid accusations against your husband's business partner, hiring investigators to stalk people, recording private conversations without consent. Victoria was building the case for Sarah's mental incompetence in real time, laying the groundwork for the backup plan she had described to James. How many people do you think will believe that you're a reliable witness to anything? Victoria continued. How many judges do you think will award custody to a mother who can't distinguish between business conversations and criminal conspiracies? The psychological manipulation was breathtaking in its efficiency. Victoria was simultaneously threatening Sarah and making her question her own perceptions, exactly as she had done to Linda, Jennifer, and presumably Margaret Whitmore. But I'm not unreasonable, Victoria said, settling into the chair across from Sarah. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, enough money to start over somewhere else, build a new life, maybe even find a new husband who actually wants to be married to you. And Emily, Sarah asked. Emily will be raised by her father and stepmother in a stable, loving environment. You'll have supervised visitation. Of course, we're not monsters. The casual way Victoria discussed taking Sarah's daughter was almost worse than the threats. This was just business to her. Another family to be reorganized according to her preferences and profit margins. What if I say no? Sarah asked. Victoria's smile returned, cold and predatory. Then you'll discover exactly how difficult life can become for a woman with your particular vulnerabilities, mental health crises, financial difficulties, social isolation, legal troubles. These things have a way of escalating quickly. You're threatening me. I'm explaining reality to you. You have two choices: accept the generous settlement and disappear gracefully, or fight a battle you cannot win against people who have more resources and fewer scruples than you can imagine. Victoria stood and moved to a desk in the corner of the room, returning with a folder full of documents. Custody agreement, financial settlement, and a very comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. Everything you need to start your new life. Sarah opened the folder and found herself staring at legal documents that would essentially erase her from Emily's life. The custody arrangement granted James full physical custody, with Sarah receiving 4 supervised visits per year. The financial settlement was substantial, but came with restrictions that would prevent her from living anywhere near Emily or James. The non-disclosure agreement was the most chilling document, prohibiting Sarah from discussing any aspect of her marriage, divorce, or James's business relationships with anyone, ever. Violation would result in the immediate forfeiture of all settlement money and additional financial penalties that would bankrupt her. "This is insane," Sarah said, staring at documents that would legally transform her from a mother into a stranger. "This is business," Victoria corrected. "Sign the papers. Sarah, take the money. Start over somewhere else. It's more than most of James's previous wives received." The casual reference to multiple previous wives hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Previous wives." Victoria's smile widened. "Did you think you were James's first marriage? His first wife died in a car accident after filing for divorce. His second wife committed suicide after losing custody of her children. Your wife number 3, Sarah. And you're going to be the smart one who walks away while she still can." The room seemed to tilt around Sarah as she processed what Victoria was telling her. James wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a serial predator who used marriage to acquire assets and eliminate inconvenient wives when they were no longer useful. "Look around this room, Sarah," Victoria said, gesturing to the comfortable living space. "This isn't a guest house. This is my home. I've been living here for 2 years, not 18 months. James brought me here to replace you before Emily was even conceived." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to reconcile this information with everything she thought she knew about her marriage and her life. "Emily wasn't a miracle baby," Victoria continued. "She was a business decision. James needed another child to complete his image as a successful family man. You were the incubator. Nothing more." The psychological assault was comprehensive and devastating. Victoria was systematically destroying every foundation of Sarah's identity, her role as a wife, her purpose as a mother, her understanding of her own life story. But as Sarah sat in that room, listening to Victoria dismantle her reality with casual cruelty, she realized something important. Victoria was taking too long, revealing too much, enjoying herself too thoroughly. Predators made mistakes when they thought they had complete control over their victims, and Sarah's phone had been recording everything. The wine cellar beneath the Morrison mansion had been James's pride when they bought the property 5 years ago. He had spent weeks selecting the perfect bottles, installing climate control systems, and creating what he called their private sanctuary for entertaining important clients. Sarah had always found the space claustrophobic, with its stone walls and single entrance. But tonight she was grateful for its structural integrity as she tested every surface for weaknesses. Victoria had locked her in the cellar 3 hours ago, after Sarah had refused to sign the custody documents and instead demanded proof of Victoria's claims about James's previous wives. "You need time to think," Victoria had said with false sympathy. "Time to understand that cooperation is your only option." But Victoria had made a crucial error. She had underestimated both Sarah's resourcefulness and her preparation for exactly this kind of situation. Sarah's phone had died after recording 2 hours of Victoria's threats and revelations, but not before uploading everything to the cloud storage system Maria had insisted she configure. More importantly, Sarah had been wearing the small recording device Linda had given her, designed to look like a fitness tracker but actually capable of transmitting audio directly to Detective Coleman's task force. The law enforcement team had been listening to everything in real time. As Sarah explored her prison, she found evidence that this cellar had been used for more than wine storage. Behind the vintage Bordeaux collection, she discovered a small room that had clearly been set up as temporary living quarters: a cot, a chemical toilet, boxes of non-perishable food, and a collection of personal items that didn't belong to anyone in the Morrison family. Among the personal effects, Sarah found something that made her blood run cold: a driver's license belonging to Margaret Whitmore. The woman Detective Coleman had claimed was missing, but Margaret wasn't missing. According to the dates on food wrappers and medication bottles, she had been imprisoned in this cellar for weeks before escaping. Sarah used her phone's flashlight to document everything. Despite the rapidly draining battery, the cellar wasn't just a prison, It was a staging area where Victoria held her victims while their lives were systematically dismantled above ground. But the most chilling discovery was a notebook filled with Victoria's handwriting, detailing the psychological profiles and destruction timelines for multiple families. Sarah's own case was documented with clinical precision, including backup plans for various scenarios and detailed notes about Emily's medical condition that could be used to argue for emergency custody changes. Subject shows expected maternal attachment disorder following premature birth. One entry read, recommend accelerating timeline for institutional commitment. Use infant's medical fragility to justify immediate custody transfer to father. Victoria had been planning to use Emily's NICU stay as evidence that Sarah was an unfit mother, unable to provide the stable environment a medically fragile infant required. Sarah was photographing the notebook when she heard voices above her head. James and Victoria were in the kitchen, and their conversation carried clearly through the old mansion's heating vents. She's been down there for hours, and James was saying, maybe we should. Should what? Victoria interrupted. Give her more time to make the wrong choice, James. We're past the point of gentle persuasion. Your wife has threatened everything we've built together. But locking her in the cellar feels extreme. What if something happens to her? What's going to happen to her is exactly what she chooses to happen. She can sign the papers and start a new life, or she can continue fighting a battle she's already lost. Sarah pressed herself against the ceiling vent, recording everything on her dying phone while listening to her husband discuss her imprisonment with disturbing casualness. The baby needs her mother, James said, and for a moment Sarah felt a flicker of hope that some part of the man she had married still existed. The baby needs stable parents, Victoria corrected. And your wife hasn't been stable since before Emily was born. The NICU nurses have documented her erratic behavior, her inability to follow medical instructions, her emotional outbursts. The accusation was particularly cruel because it was partially true. Sarah had struggled with the stress of Emily's early birth, had questioned medical decisions, had broken down crying in hospital corridors. Victoria had turned normal maternal anxiety into evidence of mental instability. Besides, Victoria continued, Emily won't remember any of this. She'll grow up thinking I'm her biological mother, and Sarah will be just a sad story about the unstable woman who couldn't handle parenthood. The casual cruelty of erasing Sarah from her daughter's life story was breathtaking. Victoria wasn't just planning to steal Emily. She was planning to rewrite history so that Sarah had never existed as a mother at all. That's when Sarah heard the sound that changed everything: police sirens in the distance, growing louder. What the hell is that? James asked above her. Probably an accident on PCH, Victoria replied, but Sarah could hear the tension in her voice. The sirens stopped in their driveway. James Morrison, LAPD, came the amplified voice from outside. We have a warrant to search these premises. The sound of running footsteps above her head was followed by frantic whispering that Sarah couldn't quite make out. Then the front door opened, and she heard Detective Coleman's voice echoing through the mansion. Mrs. Morrison, this is Detective Coleman. If you can hear me, please respond. Down here, Sarah shouted, pounding on the cellar door. I'm in the wine cellar. What followed was 20 minutes of the most satisfying sound Sarah had ever heard: power tools cutting through the reinforced lock Victoria had installed, paramedics checking her vital signs, and Detective Coleman reading Victoria and James their rights, while federal agents documented the evidence Sarah had discovered. You did it, Detective Coleman told her as she emerged from the cellar, blinking in the bright lights of the crime scene investigation. Your recording device transmitted everything. We have Victoria admitting to multiple kidnappings, documented evidence of her previous operations, and enough financial fraud evidence to put her away for decades. What about James? Sarah asked, watching her husband being led away in handcuffs. Conspiracy, fraud, accessory to kidnapping, and we're just getting started. The FBI is seizing all of Morrison Dynamics records. Turns out your husband's company has been laundering money for Victoria's operations across multiple states. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. James hadn't just been Victoria's victim or accomplice. He had been her business partner in a multi-million-dollar operation that destroyed families for profit. The other wives, Sarah said urgently. Victoria told me James had been married before, that his wives died or disappeared. We're investigating, Detective Coleman assured her. But right now, we need to get you to the hospital. You've been through a traumatic experience, and we need to make sure you're okay. As the paramedics checked her blood pressure and hydration levels, Sarah watched Victoria being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. Even in handcuffs, Victoria maintained her composure, her expression showing annoyance rather than fear or remorse. Their eyes met through the vehicle window, and Victoria mouthed something that looked like, "This isn't over." But Sarah just smiled and held up her phone, showing Victoria the cloud storage confirmation that proved every word of their conversation had been preserved as evidence. This time, Victoria had picked the wrong victim. 3 hours later, Sarah was back in the NICU, holding Emily while Dr. Chen updated her on the baby's progress. Emily was finally strong enough to come home. Ironically, on the same day that Sarah's home had been revealed as the center of a criminal conspiracy. "She's been asking for you," Dr. Chen said, settling into the chair beside Sarah's rocking chair. "Babies know their mother's voices, their scent, their heartbeat. Emily knows exactly who you are." Sarah looked down at her daughter, who was staring up at her with the intense focus that premature babies often displayed, as if they understood that attention was a survival skill. "We're going to be okay," Sarah whispered to Emily. "We're going to build a life that nobody can take away from us." As the news crews gathered outside the hospital and reporters began telling the story of the billionaire's wife who had exposed a multi-state fraud conspiracy, Sarah realized that her midlife betrayal story had become something completely different. She was no longer the victim of someone else's manipulation. She was the survivor who had fought back and won. 1 year later, Sarah Morrison stood in the sunlit conference room of her new offices in downtown Santa Monica, looking out at the Pacific Ocean while preparing for the most important presentation of her professional life. The space was smaller than what she had been accustomed to as James's wife, but every square foot belonged to her, earned through her own work and vision. Morrison Advocacy Services had grown from an idea born in Emily's NICU room into a thriving consultancy that specialized in protecting vulnerable families from predatory relationships. Sarah's client list included wives who had discovered affairs, parents dealing with manipulative partners, and adult children protecting elderly parents from financial scams. Mrs. Morrison, her assistant, Rebecca, appeared in the doorway. "The documentary crew is ready for your interview." Sarah smoothed her navy blue blazer, a power suit she had bought with her own money, and walked toward the conference room where the cameras waited. Netflix had approached her 6 months ago about telling her story as part of a larger documentary series about financial fraud and domestic manipulation. The producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Walsh, had promised to focus on survival and empowerment rather than victimization. "The thing people need to understand," Sarah said as the cameras rolled, "is that predators like Victoria don't just target weak or naive women, they target competent, successful women during vulnerable periods and then systematically undermine their confidence and support systems." The interview lasted 2 hours, covering everything from Sarah's initial discovery of the affair to the federal investigation that had ultimately connected Victoria to criminal networks in 12 states. Victoria was currently serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison, while James had been sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy and fraud. "What would you say to women who might be experiencing similar manipulation?" Caroline asked as they wrapped up the session. "Trust your instincts," Sarah replied without hesitation. "If something feels wrong, investigate. If people tell you you're being paranoid, investigate harder. And if someone tries to isolate you from your support system, that's the biggest red flag of all." After the crew left, Sarah had 30 minutes before her next client meeting. She used the time to call Dr. Chen, who had become an important part of her life in ways she never could have anticipated during Emily's hospitalization. "How did the interview go?" Michael asked. They had been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly while Emily adjusted to having a new person in their lives. "Good, I think. Strange to talk about the worst period of my life and feel grateful for it at the same time." That's called growth, Michael said with the gentle humor that had first attracted her to him. Are we still on for dinner tonight? Emily's been asking about Uncle Mike all day. Sarah smiled at the nickname Emily had given him. At 18 months old, her daughter was thriving, meeting all her developmental milestones despite her premature birth. The trauma of her first weeks of life had been replaced by the security of knowing she was wanted, protected, and loved unconditionally. We'll pick you up at 7, Sarah confirmed. Emily wants to show you her new book. The client meeting that afternoon was with a woman whose story sounded depressingly familiar, a successful attorney whose husband had recently hired a young, attractive business partner who seemed to understand him in ways his wife apparently couldn't. The woman, Patricia, looked exactly as Sarah had once looked, expensively dressed, well-maintained, and carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who was fighting a battle she didn't fully understand. I know I sound paranoid, Patricia said, twisting her wedding ring nervously. My husband keeps telling me I'm imagining things, that I'm jealous for no reason. Tell me about your instincts, Sarah said, settling back in her chair. What specifically feels wrong for the next hour? Patricia described the same patterns Sarah had experienced, the gradual erosion of her role in her husband's life, the increasing importance of the business partner, the subtle ways her concerns were dismissed as emotional overreaction. Here's what we're going to do, Sarah said, pulling out a folder. We're going to document everything: financial records, communication patterns, travel schedules, anything that seems unusual. And we're going to do it quietly, professionally, and thoroughly. Hey, what, you really think I'm not crazy? Patricia asked, and Sarah heard the same desperate need for validation that she had felt during her own investigation. I think you're a smart woman who recognizes manipulation when she sees it, Sarah replied. And I think we're going to protect your family before any real damage is done. As Patricia left with a detailed action plan and the contact information for Maria Gonzalez, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that came from turning her own trauma into protection for others. Every woman she helped was a small victory against the Victorias of the world. The evening with Michael and Emily was exactly the kind of simple happiness Sarah had learned to treasure. They cooked dinner together in her new townhouse in Manhattan Beach, with Emily helping by banging pots and adding random ingredients to the salad. Michael was patient with Emily's toddler chaos and genuinely interested in Sarah's work, asking thoughtful questions about her cases without pressing for details she couldn't share. I have new, Michael said as they cleaned dishes while Emily played with blocks on the kitchen floor. The hospital offered me the position as head of the NICU department. Michael, that's wonderful, Sarah said, turning to hug him. You deserve it completely. There's just one thing, he continued, looking slightly nervous. The position would require me to relocate to San Francisco. It's an amazing opportunity, but it would mean leaving Los Angeles. Sarah felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, the old fear of abandonment that Victoria's manipulation had embedded in her psyche. But this time, instead of panicking or trying to convince Michael to stay, she took a breath and examined her feelings rationally. How do you feel about the opportunity? She asked. Excited, Michael admitted. It's everything I've worked toward professionally, but I don't want to leave you and Emily. I don't want to end what we're building together. Sarah looked at Emily, who was stacking blocks with intense concentration, and then at Michael, who was watching her with the kind of patient attention she had learned to value above grand romantic gestures. What if we didn't have to choose? Sarah asked slowly. What if Morrison advocacy expanded to Northern California? I've been getting inquiries from women in the Bay Area. Michael's face lit up with surprise and hope. You would consider moving. I would consider building something bigger, Sarah corrected. Something that could help more people in more places. As they talked through the logistics and possibilities, Sarah realized that this was what healthy relationships look like. Two people making decisions together, supporting each other's goals, building something larger than either could create alone. It was the complete opposite of everything she had experienced with James, who had made unilateral decisions about their life while consulting with his mistress about strategy. Later that evening, after Emily was asleep and Michael had gone home to his own apartment, Sarah sat in her home office reviewing client files and planning the next phase of her business expansion. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and for a moment her heart rate spiked with the old fear that Victoria had somehow made contact from prison. Instead, the message was from Margaret Whitmore. Saw the Netflix announcement. Proud of you for telling our story. Coffee next week. Margaret had indeed survived Victoria's attempts to destroy her, and had become an invaluable part of the federal investigation that had connected Victoria to criminal networks across the country. She was now working with the FBI as a consultant, helping them identify and protect other potential victims. Sarah typed back, "Would love to." And Margaret, "Thank you for teaching me that surviving isn't enough. We have to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." As she prepared for bed, Sarah checked on Emily one last time. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully in the nursery Sarah had decorated herself, surrounded by books and toys and photos of the people who loved her unconditionally. "Your mama learned how to be strong," Sarah whispered, adjusting Emily's blankets. "And she's going to teach you to be strong too. But more than that, she's going to teach you to use your strength to protect other people." The pregnant wife betrayed had become the empowered mother and successful entrepreneur. But more importantly, she had become a woman who understood that her greatest victory wasn't just surviving Victoria's manipulation. Her greatest victory was ensuring that other families would never have to experience what she had endured. The next morning brought news that would test everything Sarah had learned about resilience and moving forward. Detective Coleman called while Sarah was giving Emily breakfast, his voice carrying the weight of information he didn't want to deliver. "Victoria's appealing her conviction," he said without preamble. "Her new legal team is claiming prosecutorial misconduct, arguing that the evidence was obtained illegally." Sarah's spoon clattered against Emily's high-chair tray. "What does that mean?" "It means we might have to go through this all over again. New trial, new testimony, new media coverage. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah looked at Emily, who was cheerfully destroying her scrambled eggs while babbling at her stuffed elephant. This little girl depended on Sarah to protect her from the chaos that had marked the first months of her life. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes," Sarah said. "Victoria chose the wrong family to destroy. She's going to learn that some women don't just survive, they make sure justice is served." As she hung up the phone, Sarah realized that her story wasn't finished. The woman who had been buried under lies and manipulation had risen stronger than before, and she wasn't going to let anyone threaten the life she had built from the ashes of her marriage. The final chapter was still being written, and Sarah Morrison was going to make sure it ended with the right person winning. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, Sarah's life had achieved a stability she once thought impossible. Morrison Advocacy Services now operated in 3 states. Emily was a happy, healthy 3-year-old, and Sarah's relationship with Michael had evolved into the kind of partnership she had once only read about in books. They were planning their wedding for the following spring, a small ceremony that would formalize the family they had already become. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. Sarah was reviewing case files in her San Francisco office when her assistant buzzed the intercom with unusual urgency. "Mrs. Morrison, there's someone here to see you. She says it's about Victoria Chen." Sarah's blood ran cold. Victoria had been in federal prison for 2 years, her appeals exhausted, her network of co-conspirators dismantled by federal investigators. There shouldn't be anyone seeking information about Victoria unless something had gone terribly wrong. The woman who entered Sarah's office was mid-40s, professionally dressed, and carrying herself with the kind of controlled tension that Sarah recognized from her own darkest days. She had the look of someone who had been beautiful before trauma reshaped her features into something harder and more watchful. "Mrs. Morrison, my name is Diana Walsh. I need to tell you something about Victoria Chen that could change everything you think you know about your case." Sarah gestured for Diana to sit, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Are you related to Linda Walsh, one of Victoria's previous victims?" "Linda Walsh was my sister," Diana said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. And she wasn't just Victoria's victim, she was her partner. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Linda, the woman who had sat in Emily's NICU room offering support and guidance, who had helped Sarah understand Victoria's patterns and build her case against her, had been Victoria's accomplice. "That's impossible," Sarah said. "Linda helped me expose Victoria. She provided evidence, connected me with other victims. She provided carefully selected evidence that supported the narrative Victoria wanted you to believe," Diana corrected. "My sister has been working with Victoria for 7 years, playing the role of the sympathetic previous victim while actually helping Victoria refine her techniques." Diana opened a folder and spread documents across Sarah's desk. Bank records, communication logs, travel itineraries that showed Linda and Victoria had been in constant contact throughout Sarah's investigation. Every piece of advice Linda gave you, every warning about Victoria's methods, every bit of support she provided was designed to guide your response in exactly the direction Victoria wanted. Sarah stared at the evidence, her mind struggling to process the implications. But Victoria was convicted. She's in prison. "Victoria is exactly where she wants to be," Diana said grimly. "Federal prison was always part of her exit strategy. She's been running this operation for too long, making too much money, attracting too much attention. Getting convicted allowed her to disappear from public scrutiny while her network continues operating." Network. Victoria wasn't working alone. Mrs. Morrison, she was the public face of an organization that specializes in relationship fraud. While she's in prison, Linda and others are expanding operations, using Victoria's conviction as proof that the authorities have solved the problem. Diana pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah surveillance photos that made her stomach clench. Linda Walsh entering office buildings, meeting with women who looked remarkably like Sarah had 2 years ago, well-dressed, exhausted, desperately seeking help. "Linda is using your story as her credential," Diana explained. "She presents herself as the woman who helped expose Victoria Chen, the survivor who understands what victims are going through. Women trust her because she helped the famous Sarah Morrison." The psychological manipulation was even more sophisticated than Sarah had realized. Victoria hadn't just been running one con, she had been running a meta-con that used her own conviction as cover for continued operations. "How do you know all this?" Sarah asked. "Because Linda recruited me 6 months ago," Diana said. "She approached me after my husband left me for his business partner, offering to help me investigate what she called professional relationship destroyers. She wanted me to infiltrate the organization, gather evidence from the inside. But you're here instead of working with her. Because I discovered something Linda doesn't know, I know," Diana said, pulling out a final document that made Sarah's hands shake as she read it. The document was a psychological evaluation dated 3 weeks ago, written by a Dr. Patricia Moreau at the Federal Correctional Institution where Victoria was serving her sentence. But it wasn't an evaluation of Victoria's mental state. It was an evaluation of Sarah's. "Victoria has been conducting remote psychological profiles of her victims from prison," Diana explained. "She's been using prison communications to coordinate with Linda, who's been gathering detailed information about your new life, your relationship with Dr. Chen, your business operations, even Emily's development and daily routines." The evaluation read like a stalker's manifesto, documenting Sarah's habits, vulnerabilities, and emotional triggers with clinical precision. Victoria knew about Michael's job offer, Emily's preschool schedule, Sarah's client meetings, and her plans for expanding Morrison advocacy services. "They're not finished with you," Diana said. "Victoria's original plan was interrupted by her arrest, but she's been adapting it from prison. Linda has been positioning herself to destroy everything you've built, using the trust and credibility she gained by helping you." Sarah felt the familiar wave of nausea that had accompanied every revelation about the scope of her manipulation. "What's their endgame?" "Complete destruction of your credibility and your business," Diana said. "Linda has been feeding information to Victoria's legal team for a wrongful conviction appeal. They're going to claim that you and Detective Coleman conspired to frame Victoria, that your evidence was fabricated, that you're a mentally unstable woman who destroyed an innocent person's life. The reversal was breathtaking in its audacity. Victoria was planning to transform herself from convicted criminal into wrongfully imprisoned victim, with Sarah as the unstable woman who had orchestrated her downfall. But there's more, Diana continued. Linda has been cultivating relationships with your current clients, presenting herself as a more experienced consultant who understands manipulation tactics better than you do. She's been slowly stealing your business while documenting every mistake you make, every moment of stress or uncertainty. Sarah thought about her recent client meetings, the subtle suggestions some women had made about seeking additional perspectives on their cases. Linda had been systematically undermining Sarah's work while appearing to support her. The plan is to destroy your business, your reputation, and your relationship with Dr. Chen, Diana explained. Then, when you're isolated and vulnerable, they'll use your emotional breakdown as evidence that you were never a reliable victim or witness. Michael, Sarah said suddenly, her heart racing, if they've been monitoring everything, Dr. Chen has been receiving anonymous reports about your mental health for months, Diana confirmed. Phone calls expressing concern about your stability, emails suggesting you might be having a breakdown, messages designed to make him question whether you're safe to be around Emily. The scope of the manipulation was staggering. Victoria hadn't just been planning to appeal her conviction. She had been orchestrating Sarah's complete destruction from federal prison, using Linda as her instrument and Sarah's own success as evidence of mental instability. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Why risk exposing yourself?" Diana's composure finally cracked, and Sarah saw the pain she had been hiding behind professional efficiency. "Because Linda convinced me to apply for a position with Morrison Advocacy Services. She wanted me to infiltrate your organization, document your methods, and find evidence of professional misconduct. But, but when I researched your work, when I saw what you had built from the destruction of your own family, I realized I couldn't be part of destroying someone who was trying to protect other women." Diana pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a text thread that made her blood run cold. Messages from Linda describing the timeline for Sarah's final destruction, the evidence they had gathered, the psychological pressure points they were planning to exploit. "They're accelerating the timeline because of your engagement to Dr. Chen," Diana explained. "Victoria sees your happiness as a threat to her appeal strategy. She needs you to be the broken, unstable woman who falsely accused her, not the successful businesswoman who exposed a criminal network." Sarah stared at the messages, seeing her life dissected with the same clinical precision Victoria had once used to plan her original destruction. The woman in federal prison was still controlling every aspect of Sarah's existence, still manipulating her reality from behind bars. But this time, Sarah wasn't the desperate, isolated woman she had been 3 years ago. This time, she had resources, allies, and most importantly, experience in fighting back against impossible odds. "Diana," Sarah said slowly, "how would you feel about helping me destroy them instead?" For the first time since entering the office, Diana smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." As they began planning their counterattack, Sarah realized that Victoria had made the same mistake that had led to her conviction. She had underestimated the strength and resourcefulness of the women she was trying to destroy. The final battle for Sarah's life and freedom was about to begin, and this time she was going to make sure Victoria Chen never threatened another family again. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Key yes a win. Sarah Morrison's story continues in Buried Secrets, The Network Exposed, as she discovers that Victoria Chen was just one part of a national conspiracy targeting vulnerable families. With new allies and deadly enemies, Sarah must protect not only her own family, but hundreds of potential victims across the country. Will Sarah's fight for justice finally end the network that destroyed so many lives, or will Victoria's final gambit succeed in destroying everything Sarah has fought to build? The truth about the mansion's buried secrets is darker than anyone imagined, and Sarah Morrison is the only woman who can expose them all.